Welcome back. The world has entered a phase where design is becoming a critical skill set for many professions, including education, media, studies, engineering, and then the usual industries like marketing and communications. So we're taking a look at opportunities for design as a career and how young professionals can make their mark in this industry. Michele Davis, Corporate Business Navigator at Vega School for Brand Leadership, joining us at the desk. Tony Koederman, Adreview Editor, and then Louise, Hildebrand, Creative Director at Quirk. Thank you all for joining us. Tony, you had your awards last night, Adreview Awards. So tell us about some of the themes that came through this year when it comes to the entrants that you saw and then ultimately the ones that were given the nod.
Were you talking about design specifically? Or
yeah, I suppose we could look at design specifically.
Yes. Well, a general trend in design is becoming more important. And in this country, you've seen the design in Durban in Cape Town, which is putting Cape Town on the world map as a leading creative city. So design is big, and it attracts huge numbers of people, and it's always surprised me. It seems to have more people in design than in advertising, and I think one of the reasons for that is that design covers everything. I mean, you have architects entering their competitions because they're designing interiors or exteriors. You have industrial design, all sorts of. So it's not necessarily graphic design. Mm-hmm. So it's a growing field and plenty of opportunities, I think. The other thing that's interesting about it, and this is perhaps what underpins that, is that over the last 10 or 20 years, branding has become much more closely associated with design, and that's logical because your brand has got to be designed, and it's got to be an attractive design that reflects the times and the company and what it does. So, and then branding becomes the core thing that advertisers are trying to achieve, a good brand. So the design people are trying, there's a bit of a turf war going on. They're trying to capture this turf, and the advertising agencies are trying to keep it for themselves. So, yeah, those are two important trends.
Yeah, it's interesting. What are the hot careers right now from Vega's perspective? I mean, where do you see most of the students interested, and where do you see the need also from the economy's perspective when it comes to design?
Samantha, I think what we're seeing particularly is a move not away from, but in addition to traditional design careers, in other words, the visual designer, etc., to design thinking, which is not new globally, but is relatively new in the South African context, where it's becoming more and more important in any business to be able to think in a design manner, which means systemic thinking. It means the ability to reframe problems and issues. So we're seeing, even with our students that are doing the more business-oriented type degrees, a massive demand for somebody who is a design thinker out there in industry. You can be as creative and possibly even more creative with a balance sheet.
How do you train someone to be a design thinker, though? I mean, give us some ideas of what skills you train people to get.
It really is about a process. In the same way as your more creative type designer has a process of reframing the way we look at things, and I think that underpins design thinking, is to look at things from different angles and don't just follow that linear type thinking that we're so used to. A leads to B leads to C. We are more into what if thinking, and once you start looking at the patterning that design thinking brings with it, it really is just practice. It's what we do naturally and aren't even aware of.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, this whole concept of being almost systemic to the company, to have people who are, to some degree designers and reshaping industries like media, we were saying earlier.
Sure, I mean, I think that one thing, so whether it's education or media or whatever, I mean, you need people that have got the skills to be able to put, that's a picture that tells 1,000 words. I mean, maybe the question I'd put to Louise is, how do you actually pick the people? I mean, one of the problems, we advertise for a designer and you get 100 CVs and everybody's prepared to work for 7 or 8 grand or whatever it is. How do you kind of pick out the people that are going to add value to your team? How do you, what skill sets do you look for as a creative director that you're looking for from young talent?
I think we're talking about two different things, though. The idea of design thinking is much more about creative problem solving and about an approach to problems that businesses can use. What you're referring to specifically are skills art-based designers specifically. So I think it might be useful to also think about creative problem solving and not designers who deliver outputs. So at Quirk, where I work, we look for designers that put users first. So ultimately design and the products that you're designing are destined to be used by humans always. So it's very important that that kind of sensitivity and empathy in design comes through. Obviously skill is very important. It's difficult to find hot young designers, I have to say. But what we're looking for is also a culture fit. I mean, it's important that what the company believes in fits with what the designer believes in and the kind of work that they want to do. So
why is it so difficult to find the skills right now?
Our standards are incredibly high, and I think that because there are so few good designers, the competition is really fierce. So a lot of young designers are finding jobs when they're not, I think, not good enough yet. I think it's about practice also, and it's about honing your skill, and it's about getting deeper into the philosophy of design. I think a lot of designers coming out of universities and sort of smaller design colleges, with a couple of exceptions, notably Vega, actually, I'm not being funny anyway, they see design as making something look nice. And I think it's much deeper than that, and it has much more potential than that. And I think that's a slightly more in-depth approach to design that not that many young designers have.
But I think that's exactly the problem that we face in media in general, is that you have people that can make things look nice, but how do you go and tell them that there's an infographic talking about the Marikana massacre, and how are you going to tell the story using, you have to have an understanding of not just good looking things, but the content that they are. And how do you teach, how do you develop those skills pre the job environment?
I think what we're focusing on in terms of teaching is a very, very solid understanding of strategy. And I mean, we call it school projects and birthday cards is out. You can't just pretty things up. You need to really understand the whole situational analysis around whatever communication challenge you have, and the importance of human-centric insight. As you alluded to, we're talking about people. We're not just talking about product. So that's very solid strategic insight is something that we focus on.
Your thoughts on this, Tony?
Well, there's another problem area, and that is the quality of schooling. Lots of youngsters coming out of school are not adequately prepared for the working world. And this has been raised not in design specifically, but in, for example, copywriting. The schools, I think they can't fill their copywriting courses because the youngsters can't write a sentence in the English language.
So it's just basic, literary skills that are needed. Attributes of a designer, of a great designer, coming to mind are, someone who's very logical, someone who has, kind of a level of intelligence, but is also very creative. And it's almost, you always see those two as separate to a degree, or not completely, nodding your head.
Not.
I think it depends on the kind of design you're talking about. I think an industrial designer is usually a much more analytical designer, because it has so much engineering built into the design. But someone like a user interface designer needs to be quite technical but quite empathetic at the same time, and a graphic designer needs a much gentler aesthetic touch also, and it entirely depends, I think.
And the role of digital, I mean, I think that's one of the things. I'm looking at a print advert here at the moment, but we know media is going toward interactivity and the ability, and so it's user interface, it's the ability not to irritate somebody with great big flashing bells and whistles, or those carousels that used to be popular. I mean, how important is when you're considering going into design, the actual digital side of things? Because I think that's one of the interesting things I look at when I see going through CVs, is that the digital isn't there for a lot of these youngsters.
So I was one of the judges at Portfolio Night on Wednesday evening, where it's kind of speed dating between creative directors and design students, and also advertising students and illustrators and copywriters. And I met a young copywriting student who wanted to go into book and magazine and layout, and she didn't have a single piece of digital design. And I said to her, step one, it's assumed that a print title in the future, if not already, and there's a problem if not already, has a digital version, and then you have to become familiar with that. It's just an assumed skill. It's a hygiene factor level at this point. It's not.
I like the way you refer to it as that hygiene factor level for designers, digital experience there, or digital knowledge at least from the university's perspective. Thank you so much for joining us.